Revelation. It can be complicated and draws a lot of threads together, but we're trying to do our best, and you keep praying for us. Open your Bibles to Revelation chapter 17. Last week we started the first 6 verses, which are really the harlot exposed. The angel exposes to John, the angel relays to John the harlot. Now that's terminology that may be a little blunt. It's Bible terminology. It's the terminology that God has used for centuries as He talked through the prophet, as He talked to and then through the prophets. He used that terminology many times as He spoke of His people not being faithful to Him, and they've gone whoring after other gods. And so it's language that's rooted in the Scriptures, and it's in the New Testament as well. Paul spoke to the church at Corinth, telling them that he had espoused them to one. He had 2 Corinthians 11. Let me get this right. He had espoused them as a chaste virgin. I want to get that terminology just right. And he said, I'm jealous over you, chapter 11, verse 2, with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. And so that kind of marital relationship is throughout the Scriptures. And that faithfulness that is required in a marital relationship is a picture, and so much so that God told Hosea, obviously the prophet, to marry a harlot and demonstrate how He felt about His nation of Israel and their unfaithfulness to Him. And Hosea would actually feel that, how that unfaithfulness would hurt. And so the first 6 verses of Revelation 17, we have the harlot exposed for what she is. A tool of Satan, a tool of the Antichrist. Satan has empowered the Antichrist. We'll see that again tonight. And the sum total of all false religion. People put this, I believe, too narrow-mindedly into one false religious faith system or one other false religious faith system on the earth. And I think it's all way too narrow-minded to call the harlot one false religious system. I think it's the sum total of all of them, because we're talking about a one-world religion. We'll emphasize that through tonight. So the harlot has been exposed for what she is, Mystery Babylon. And so that tells us in verse 5 that we're talking in this particular section about the harlot, that we're not talking about exactly right there. We're not. In other places we will be. Not talking about an exact city or place, but Mystery Babylon, which is intended, I believe, to take you back to Genesis 11. And in Genesis 11 we see the attempt in rebellion to God to build an empire of all kindreds, nations. There's only one language, of all people, and build this rebellious system, a religious enterprise, and build it. They tried until God came down and confounded it, and called it thereof then Babel. And so Mystery Babylon is intended to take them all the way back to that first mass attempt in rebellion to God. And that's what she is, an attempt at a rebellion to God. And she's the mother, verse 5, of harlots. She's the origin of all of these falsenesses and abominations of the earth. In verse 6, she's the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. So she's been very active in her false systems. And again, I think plural. Very active in her false systems to murder the saints of God. She's drunken. It's like, you ever watch those Shark Tank things, those shark movies or a documentary when the shark tastes blood? When the shark gets that first taste of blood, then there's this frenzy and they lose their mind going after whatever is bleeding. I saw the woman drunken with the blood. It turns into, once she got a taste of it, she's under the influence of it, and she's mesmerized by it, and it's all she wants is the blood of martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, verse 6, I wondered with great admiration. Remember, we're not talking about admiration, but he stood, not admiration in a good sense, but he stood amazed. Probably stood amazed at a lot of different things. How on the one hand she would represent as so beautiful, and on the other hand be so grotesque. That's parallel, that can be parallel thinking as you think on a prostitute or a harlot. Maybe he was amazed at what she peddles as love and probably tolerance and inclusiveness, because she's trying to be a one-world religion, and yet she's murdering faithful followers of Christ. There's a lot of things that John could have been wondering about, amazed at, in awe of. Verse 7. Well, let me think about a couple of things here. Remember, through the first 3.5, or through the 7 years of the tribulation, the Antichrist will factor prominently. First 3.5 years, we read from Daniel that he would make a covenant with the nations, and that at the midpoint he would break that covenant. And there's two very distinct sections of the 7-year tribulation. And there's two very distinct sections of the rule of the beast. And remember, the beast is the Antichrist. And we'll see that really shine out tonight. That the first 3.5 years, he's a peacemaker. He's making peace treaties. He's promising all this inclusiveness. He's promising all this. The temple is rebuilt. Everything is fine. And at the 3.5 year point, everything changes. And the latter 3.5 years is the great tribulation, the time like no other. And we'll see that factor prominently tonight. We've seen the beast, the Antichrist, is empowered by Satan. Jump back a couple of chapters to chapter 13, and let's see this quick before we dive in. Let's not forget, the Antichrist is a man. The coming world leader is a man. But he is empowered by Satan. Chapter 13, verse 4. And they worship the dragon. Remember, from chapter 12, that's Satan. They worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. That's the Antichrist, all through this time. So Satan gives power to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And one of the reasons is the previous verse. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Remember, there was, in some way, shape, or form, a portrayal of death. Who knows whether he died actually and raised again by the power of Satan, whether it only appeared to be death, I don't know. Everybody's divided on that. But the world thought he was dead. The Antichrist is dead. But he wasn't. He rose from the dead. And that verse 3 talks about it. Oh, I went back to 17. Verse 3 talks about it there in chapter 13. One of his heads was wounded unto death, and the deadly wound was healed. And the world wondered after the beast. And that propelled him to prominence. And that'll factor in very prominently tonight. So, verse 7, John says, now, there's a lot to take in. I mean, the angel tells John, there's a lot to take in. Why dost thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery. I will explain what's going on. I will explain the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. Remember, in verse 3, the woman rode the beast. She was propelled forward. She was propelled to prominence. False religion was moved in the front spotlight by false religion was moved into the front spotlight by Antichrist. But she's soon not to be needed, and we'll see that as this unfolds. Verse 7, and the angel said unto me, Wherefore dost thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not. What are we talking about? He was and is not. And we'll see in verse 8, he was and is not and yet is. At the very bottom of verse 8. He's what are we talking about? He's talking about, I'm very confident, he's talking about the Antichrist, the beast that was, in the first 3.5 years of his ministry, if you want to call it that, the first 3.5 years of his rule was a peacemaking, under the guise of peacemaking rule, and then he died. And he was, and then he is not, and yet is, because he resurrected. Verse 8, the beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and don't ever forget, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. So we have the whole lifespan of the beast right there. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder. They will stand in amazement. And we read back in chapter 13 on purpose about that. That changed everything when he, and I'll put air quotes, rose from the dead. That changed everything. His rule changed. People wandering after him in the masses changed. Remember, everyone's following the beast that are not redeemed. Universal following, unless they're redeemed. And the Lord talked about this, that it's going to be so bad, the deception is going to be so great, that even if it were possible, they would deceive the very elect. It's not possible, because the Spirit of God enlightens the elect. But Matthew 24:24 tells us, the Lord tells us, this is going to be a time of such deception that if it were possible, even the very elect were deceived. And at that midpoint, when he raises from the dead, and you can think about it now, in our technological age, something like that can be seen around the world instantaneously. I mean, I remember the first time one of the first times there was a satellite broadcast that we watched something on our television set in Northwest Ohio that was taking place in Hawaii at the time. And it was unheard of. It was a satellite broadcast, bouncing off a satellite, coming back, and we were watching live television halfway around the world. Nowadays, that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. So the knowledge of his resurrection will be easily, you can see how it be easily understood universally. And all the redeemed follow the beast. Unredeemed. All the unredeemed follow the beast. A universal following. Now verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Now, I've come to understand this differently as I studied it. A lot of people will take those 7 mountains and run right to the 7 mountains of Rome, and I don't go there. I think it's far too narrow-minded. The 7 kings are 7 mountains, One of the commentators put me onto this, and you can read in the Old Testament. Let's just read one passage out of Psalm 30. Think about the Old Testament scriptures and the Lord talking about high places and mountains as places of rule, elevated seats of places of rule. Psalm 30 and verse 7 makes a reference to that effect. Lord, by thy favor thou hast made my mountain to stand strong. Thou didst hide thy face, and I was troubled. And that's one of many passages where the rule, the elevated seat of authority is described as a mountain. There's many others. And look at this now back in our text. Let's see how this fits in verse 9. And there is the mind that hath wisdom. And he's going to explain what he's showing to John. The angel's going to explain what he's showing to John. The 7 heads of the beast are the 7 mountains. I believe that is elevated seats of authority on which the woman sitteth. She's been sitting upon these the civil government and religious rulership has all been combined, and they've been married, and no separation, no desire for separation of church and state in this arena. State religion mandated by the beast, propagated by the woman, the harlot, the sum total of all false religions. These 7 heads are 7 mountains or elevated seats of authority, which would then have kings, right? Look at the next verse. And there are 7 kings. So in these elevated seats of authority, there were 7 kings. And now he begins to describe them. 5 are fallen. So there's 7 empires represented here. I don't care what 7 they are. Everybody wants to say, what's the 7? It doesn't matter. There's 7 empires described here. 5 are fallen, and 1 is. The only one I care about is that one, for argument's sake. The one that would have been in John's mind is Rome. The world empire at that time, the closest thing to world domination at that time, Rome. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. He's describing the one that would follow that. And I believe that is none other than the first 3.5-year rule of the Antichrist. The first 3.5-year rule that ushered in an entirely different kingdom economy. Instead of all these little empires, more and more the Antichrist is moving to a one world government. Everything that you look around at today, there's so many strides towards that in our day. But this one that is not yet come, when he cometh, verse 10, he must continue a short space. This one, when he comes, it's not going to last long. I believe he's talking about the 3.5 years of the first half of the tribulation. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. Now, I believe that this is clearly the beast that was and is not. The beast that had that world global domination and then died, supposedly. He's the 8th. The middle of that tribulation, the middle of the 3.5 years, is a game changer for everything because of that false resurrection, that counterfeit resurrection. And he's clearly number 8 It says so in verse 11. He's the eighth. I believe he's the seventh and eighth, divided by that segment, that event that propels him forward, where the whole world, now they wonder. I mean, at first, he's a great speaker. He's bringing people together. He's articulate. He's peaceable. He's promising the moon and then some. And he's bringing everybody together. And it's very effective. And then he dies and raises from the dead. Or at least fakes it. And then, wow. Nothing can hold him back. His power becomes complete. So, as John is having this described to him by the angel, in verse 8, everybody is following the beast whose names are not written in the book of life. That's the third or fourth time we've read that. That same thought in other verses. It's a universal following of those whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life. And when he has that fake death and resurrection, his power becomes complete. And we'll see some things he does because of that. And so he comes in and he follows a rule that was little kingdoms here and there, little empires here and there, and he comes onto the scene and he begins to rule the world. Literally. One world ruler. And at first peaceably, then the event that propels him forward, and then not so peaceably. Drunk with the blood of martyrs. He's the eighth, and is of the seven. He's the sum total of all the previous that goeth and goeth. He's the sum total of all the previous seven and goeth into perdition. So his end is destruction. Although at first it sure doesn't look like it. At first it sure looks like he's undefeatable. Now the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. Now we have 10 other kings. We've had 7 empires. 5 had fallen. 1 is, probably Rome. 1 was coming, the first reign of the Antichrist. And then there was going to be that second reign after the resurrection. That's number 8. And now he's world leader. Undisputed world leader. And he seems to have 10 kings. 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour, or a short space, with the beast. So the beast is ruling. He's kingdom number 8. That much we know because it said so. So there's no supposition. He's the 8th. And there's 10 kings. And he's given them, verse 12, they receive power from him, and they have this power. It's described as 1 hour, a short space of time. So the Antichrist, with now his power complete, has 10 generals or 10 kings. Maybe the earth is divided up into 10 subdivisions or regions, and he rules. We'll see in this that their allegiance is 100% to him. So these 10 other kings are given authority by the beast, the Antichrist, briefly. Verse 13, these have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. They are completely unified and completely devoted to the beast, or the Antichrist. So he has complete control. He has complete civil control over the earth. And she has made it, the harlot has made it, the sum total of all false religion has made it, so that that control, that civil control of all the earth has been melded together with religious control as well. She has done her job. She has served her purpose. She has ridden in on the beast, and she has propelled all this false deception, falsehood religion, counterfeit religion. She's propelled it all forward. And a lot of people want to name it this one, name it that one, name it. I think it's the sum total of all of it. I think to name it any one religion is way too narrow-minded, because we're bringing the whole world together. And she's done that under the guise of the one common denominator is rebellion against God. Rebellion against Christ. Rebellion against all that is Christian. And she has served her purpose in bringing a one-world religion together. The beast has successfully accomplished bringing a one-world government together, of which he is the head, and the 10 generals or kings are under him, and they are of one mind, verse 13, and all their power, and they give all their power and strength to the beast. And all of this collection of power, verse 14, these make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So, all of humanity, all of unredeemed humanity, under the rulership of the Antichrist and his 10 kings, make war with the Lamb. These make war with the Lamb, but the Lamb shall overcome them. Now he cuts back in the scenery a little bit in verse 15. He says, and he, the angel, saith unto me, John, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And we dealt with that when we were back talking about the harlot. And these, notice that where she sits, where she has sway, is over humanity. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the harlot, the whore. What? Wait a minute. They've been in cahoots now for years. She's been used of him, the Antichrist, and the Antichrist has used her. They've used each other. They've propelled themselves together in cahoots. Remember the second beast of chapter, 14, the false prophet. And so with the dragon, you have Satan, and the first beast, Antichrist, and the second beast, false prophet, you have the evil trinity. And they propelled forward with the harlot. Any false religion, all false religion, use any or all, doesn't matter. They're all opposed to God. They're all opposed to truth. They're all opposed to the faith. But now all of a sudden in verse 16, the 10 horns, which have been described already as the 10 kings, they hate the harlot because their allegiance is to the beast. And the harlot has served her purpose. She is no longer needed. All this false religion helped propel him, but his power has now become complete. And all of his generals under him are unified under him and promoting him. And all of the unredeemed are following the Antichrist and in allegiance to him. It's all locked down. He doesn't need her anymore. And the 10 generals, the 10 kings, represented by the 10 horns, sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the harlot. and shall make her desolate, naked, shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. There, she's no longer needed. She's been a useful tool, but it's time to be rid of her, because she takes away from the Antichrist. And everything is about promoting, serving, and allegiance to the Antichrist. So that one that was here described as the mother of harlots and Mystery Babylon, she's about to be expendable and gone. But look at the next verse. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill His will. All of this is the working of God. He is getting rid of the old harlot and the sum total of all that false religion. And He's elevating the beast so He can take down the beast. What does it say here? For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill His will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. All of this is playing out exactly the way God has intended. Do you remember as Paul wrote about Pharaoh, I believe it was in Romans, that he talked about elevating Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, of course, was in tremendous rebellion against God. And the implication is, I don't remember the exact phrase, but he raised Pharaoh up so that he could show his power as he took Pharaoh down. He allowed Pharaoh to gain in strength and gain in empire might. And as Pharaoh, and all of that was in Pharaoh's heart was rebellion. Read Exodus over and over. Pharaoh hardened his heart against God. It was all willful, intentional rebellion against God. But God allowed his empire to grow and grow and grow until He destroyed it and showed His power in destroying it. Parallel to this, God put in their hearts to fulfill His will. So the 10 kings that had all their allegiance to the Antichrist, they said, we don't need her anymore. We want her gone. They devoured her. And then another quick parenthetical explanatory note, the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And I think that is a reference to literal Babylon rebuilt. Probably literal Babylon rebuilt, and the central headquarters of the Antichrist. But you see here in chapter 17, the harlot exposed and the harlot explained, and her relationship with the beast, and how the harlot is going to be destroyed. And we'll see in chapter 18 the fall of Babylon. And we're soon to see the destruction. Remember, it made war with the saints. The Antichrist and all his made war with the Lamb. Made war with the Lamb, and the Lamb, verse 14, shall overcome them. We're nearing the end. Remember the time when the saints cried out in anguish, "How long, Lord? How long till you avenge our blood? How much more blood has to be shed, and how long till it's avenged?" Very soon. Very soon. The pieces of this are coming together. Verse 17 of this text ought to give the child of God so much confidence. None of this is outside the permissive plan of God and the providential working of God. None of what's going on in our culture today, none of what's going on in the Middle East, none of what's going on in Washington, none of what's going on anywhere is outside the plan of God. He's got it all under control. He's going to sort it all out. And it's all going in the direction He wants it to go. And for that, I am thankful. So with the intricate questions that may be in the text and the meanings of some of the words and some of the pictures and the inferences, take away the big picture. All that oppose God make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb overcomes them. And it's all part of the plan of God. That gives me hope. Let's stand.